My name is Detective Marcus Sullivan, retired, 61 years old, widowed for 3 years now, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make your blood boil the way mine did. See, people think when you lose your badge, you lose your power. They think when you lose your wife, you lose your fight. They think when you're a grieving old man, you become harmless. They're wrong. I spent 37 years on the force, trained half the detectives in this city, solved cases that made headlines, put away killers, rapists, and every piece of human garbage you can imagine. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I had to do when they came after my daughter. You want to know what real rage feels like? It's not shouting, it's not throwing punches. Real rage is ice-cold calculation. It's the moment you realize that everything you've learned about justice, everything you've sacrificed for the law, everything you've believed about protecting the innocent, it all comes down to 30 seconds of decision-making that will define the rest of your life. And I made my decision at a barbecue on a sunny Saturday afternoon when I watched a 28-year-old piece of shit put his hands around my daughter's throat while his billionaire daddy clapped and called it family tradition. They thought I was just a broken-down old cop mourning his dead wife. They forgot I was the man who taught this city how to hunt predators. Let me tell you how we got here, because this story doesn't start with violence. It starts with love. My daughter Emma, God, she's beautiful like her mother was. Soft heart, kind eyes. Became a nurse because she wanted to heal people. After Sarah died, Emma was all I had left. She'd come over twice a week, bring me dinner, make sure I was taking my medications, force me to leave the house. She saved my life after the funeral when I was drowning in whiskey and regret. So when she met David Harrington, I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. He was everything a father thinks he wants for his daughter on paper. Rich family, old money from real estate development, handsome, charming, educated. He drove a Tesla, wore expensive suits, brought her flowers. When he proposed after 8 months, I thought maybe my baby girl had found the stability she deserved. But I'm a detective, was a detective. You don't just turn that off. And David Harrington had tells. Small things at first, the way he'd interrupt her when she spoke, how he'd answer for her when I asked her direct questions, the subtle way he'd steer conversations away from her job, her friends, her interests. I'd watch him touch her arm when she laughed too loud, see her immediately quiet down. I'd notice how she started checking her phone constantly when we were together, how she'd get anxious if she didn't respond to his texts within minutes. "Dad, he just likes to know where I am," she'd say when I asked about it. "He worries because he loves me." Love, Christ. I've seen what love looks like, and it doesn't come with GPS tracking and isolation tactics. The red flags kept coming. Emma stopped going out with her nursing school friends, stopped coming to our weekly dinners as often. When she did come, she'd make excuses to leave early. David likes when I'm home to make dinner. David doesn't like when I'm out too late. David thinks it's weird how close we are. David thinks. David likes. David doesn't approve. My daughter, my brilliant, independent, strong daughter, had become a ventriloquist dummy, and David Harrington was working her strings. But the worst part, she was disappearing into herself. The light in her eyes was dimming. She'd apologize for things that weren't her fault. She'd ask permission for things she'd never needed permission for before. She started wearing different clothes, more conservative, less colourful. Her hair was always perfect, her makeup always just so. She looked like she was performing being the perfect girlfriend every second of every day. And when I tried to talk to her about it, "Dad, you just don't understand because you've been alone so long. This is what relationships look like when both people care about each other." That cut deep, because she was right. I had been alone. Sarah's cancer took 18 months to kill her, and I'd been so focused on work, on cases, on other people's tragedies, that I'd missed too much time with my own wife. Maybe I didn't understand modern relationships. Maybe I was just a bitter old widower who couldn't stand seeing his daughter happy. But then I met David's father, Thomas Harrington, 73 years old, worth about $400 million according to Forbes, owned half the commercial real estate in 3 counties, sat on charity boards donated to politicians, had his name on hospital wings and university buildings. A pillar of the goddamn community. He invited Emma and me to dinner at his estate, calling it a proper introduction. The house was obscene. 15,000 square feet, imported marble everywhere, paintings worth more than my pension, staff in actual uniforms, a dining room table that could seat 20 people, and Thomas Harrington was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd never heard the word no in his entire privileged life. Arrogant, condescending, with this way of speaking that made it clear he thought everyone around him was a servant or an obstacle. He kept calling me detective with this smirk, like my career was some kind of cute hobby. He talked about Emma like she wasn't sitting right there. David's always had excellent taste, he said, cutting into a steak that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. His mother was quite beautiful too, before she let herself go. Before she let herself go. I'd heard about David's mother from Emma, Margaret Harrington, died of complications from a fall when David was 16. Complications, right, but Thomas wasn't done. Emma will make a lovely addition to our family. David's told me she's very manageable. Manageable, like she was a horse he was thinking of buying. Emma just smiled and stayed quiet through the whole dinner. When she did speak, Thomas would interrupt her or correct her. David would squeeze her hand under the table, hard enough that I could see her wince, whenever she said something his father didn't approve of. I bit my tongue through the entire meal because Emma had begged me to make a good impression. Please, Dad, this is important to me. I need them to like you. Need them to like me. My daughter needed the approval of these entitled sociopaths. That should have been my first warning that this wasn't just controlling behavior, this was systematic conditioning. After dinner, Thomas walked me to his study for drinks. Bourbon that cost more than most people make in a week, served in crystal glasses older than both our families combined. The walls were covered with hunting trophies, photos of him shaking hands with politicians and businessmen, awards for his philanthropic contributions. I like you, Detective Sullivan, he said, pouring himself 3 fingers of bourbon. You're practical. You understand how the world really works. I didn't say anything, just waited. David and Emma are very serious, he continued. Marriage serious. And when they marry, she becomes part of our family. Our family has traditions, standards, ways of doing things that have kept us successful for 3 generations. He walked over to a framed photo on his desk. His wedding picture with Margaret. She was beautiful, but even in the photo, she looked small next to him. Diminished. Margaret understood her role, he said, touching the frame. Wives in our family understand that their husbands lead, and they follow. It's not fashionable to say so anymore, but it's the natural order. Men make the decisions. Women support those decisions. Children learn respect through discipline. Everyone knows their place. Everyone stays in line. Everyone's happy. The way he said discipline made my skin crawl. Emma seems like a smart girl, he continued. David's told me she can be a little spirited sometimes, independent, but that's nothing proper guidance can't fix. David knows how to handle women. I taught him. Handle women, like we were livestock. I finished my bourbon and set the glass down carefully. Emma's not property, Mr. Harrington. He laughed. Actually laughed. Of course not, Detective, but marriage is a contract, and in our contracts the terms are very clear. The husband provides, the wife obeys. David will take excellent care of your daughter, as long as she remembers her place. Remembers her place. I wanted to put my fist through his smug face right then, but I held back. I told myself this was just old-fashioned thinking, outdated gender roles, annoying but not dangerous. I was wrong. The first real incident happened 3 weeks later. Emma showed up at my house unannounced on a Tuesday evening, which wasn't unusual, but she was wearing long sleeves in 90-degree heat, which was. "Hey, Dad," she said, giving me a one-armed hug. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." She was favoring her right wrist, keeping it close to her body, not using it to gesture the way she normally would. When she reached for her coffee cup, I saw her flinch. "What happened to your wrist?" I asked. "Oh, this." She glanced down like she'd forgotten about it. "Just slipped in the kitchen yesterday. Caught myself wrong when I fell. It's nothing." Nothing. Right. I've seen enough slips in the kitchen to know what they really are, but Emma was 28 years old, a grown woman. I couldn't force her to show me her wrist, couldn't demand to know what really happened. All I could do was watch her lie to my face and pretend I believed her. But I started documenting things after that. Times she showed up with mysterious bruises, occasions when she cancelled plans last minute because David had a bad day at work and needed me home, conversations where she'd start to tell me something, then stop herself and change the subject. I started paying attention to her social media, which I'd never done before. Her posts became less frequent, more curated. Always photos of her and David at expensive restaurants or charity events, always looking perfect. Never candid shots with friends anymore. Never pictures from her job at the hospital. Just Emma as accessory, Emma as trophy, Emma as proof of David's success. And the comments from his family friends were telling. So well behaved. David's so lucky to have found someone so accommodating. She's learning to be a proper Harrington wife. Learning to be. Like being a wife was a skill that required training. Training that apparently involved my daughter showing up at my house with injuries she was too scared to talk about. I tried to bring it up gently. "Emma, you know you can tell me anything, right? If something's wrong, if you need help with anything." "Dad, stop, I'm fine. David and I are fine. We're great, actually. He's talking about setting a date for the wedding." The wedding. Jesus Christ, the wedding. That's when Thomas Harrington decided to throw an engagement party. A proper celebration, as he put it. 50 people at his estate. Politicians, business associates, country club friends. The kind of people who consider themselves society but wouldn't cross the street to help someone bleeding on the sidewalk. Emma spent weeks preparing for this party. New dress, new shoes, new jewelry David picked out for her. She was nervous in a way I'd never seen her nervous before. Not excited nervous, terrified nervous. "It has to be perfect, Dad," she kept saying. "Thomas is inviting some very important people. David's business partners will be there. I can't embarrass him." Embarrass him. My daughter was worried about embarrassing the man who was supposed to love her unconditionally. The party was on a Saturday in late September. Beautiful weather, perfect for the outdoor barbecue Thomas had planned. I showed up in my best suit, prepared to smile and make small talk and watch my daughter perform happiness for a crowd of strangers. The Harrington estate was decorated like something out of a magazine. White tents, string lights, flowers everywhere. Servers in white uniforms carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A jazz quartet playing in the background. It looked like a fairy tale. It was actually a nightmare. I could see the stress radiating off Emma from the moment I arrived. She was greeting guests with David, playing the perfect hostess, but her shoulders were rigid with tension. She kept touching her hair, smoothing her dress, checking her reflection in windows. David had his arm around her waist, but his grip looked more possessive than affectionate. And Thomas was holding court like the king of his own little kingdom, introducing David and Emma as the next generation of Harrington excellence. He kept making jokes about training Emma to be a proper wife that made the men laugh and the women smile uncomfortably. I tried to stay close to Emma, but David kept steering her away from me. Emma, there's someone you need to meet. Emma, Thomas wants to introduce you to the mayor. Emma, we should get some photos by the fountain. She was being paraded around like a show pony, and I could see the exhaustion building in her eyes. The barbecue lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of watching my daughter shrink smaller and smaller while everyone celebrated her engagement to a man who was slowly erasing her personality. 3 hours of listening to Thomas Harrington brag about his son's catch and make increasingly inappropriate comments about marriage and wives and keeping women in line. And then it happened. Emma was carrying a tray of barbecue sauce to the main buffet table. Simple task, should have taken 30 seconds. But David was standing near the table talking to some business associate, gesturing with his beer bottle, not paying attention to anything except his own voice. Emma said, "Excuse me," and tried to step around him to reach the table. David didn't hear her over his own conversation. He stepped backward without looking. Emma, trying to avoid bumping into him, twisted to the side. The tray slipped. Barbecue sauce splashed across the front of David's white button-down shirt. The entire party went silent. David looked down at his shirt, looked at Emma, looked at the sauce stains spreading across the expensive fabric. And then he snapped. "Are you fucking kidding me?" he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This shirt cost $300, you clumsy bitch." Emma's face went white. "David, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I can get club soda, I can—" "Shut up," he said. And before I could move, before I could think, before I could breathe, he grabbed her by the throat and shoved her backward against the wooden support post of the barbecue tent. Her head hit the post with a sound that made my stomach drop. Her feet actually left the ground for a second. His hand was around her neck, his thumb pressing into her windpipe, his face twisted with rage. "Maybe next time you'll pay attention to where you're going," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Maybe next time you'll think before you fuck up." The entire party was frozen. 50 people watching my daughter get strangled by her fiancé, and nobody moved. Nobody said anything. Nobody did a goddamn thing, except Thomas Harrington. He started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause that cut through the silence like a knife. "Excellent," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "That's exactly how a son of mine handles his women. David, your grandfather would be proud." More applause from the crowd. Not everyone. Some people looked uncomfortable, some were staring at their feet. But enough. Enough to let me know that this wasn't shocking to them. This was normal. This was expected. This was what they called family tradition. I started moving toward them, every instinct screaming at me to protect my daughter, to get his hands off her, to end this before he crushed her windpipe. But Thomas stepped in front of me. "Detective Sullivan," he said calmly, like we were discussing the weather. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation here." "Get the fuck out of my way," I said, loud enough that several people turned to stare. "David is correcting his fiancée," Thomas continued, still blocking my path to Emma. "This is how marriages work in our family, how they've always worked. If you interfere with that process, you'll be trespassing on my property and threatening my son. I have 40 witnesses here who will testify that you became violent and irrational." I looked around at the crowd, saw the faces of politicians, judges, business leaders, society wives, all watching, all calculating, all ready to lie for Thomas Harrington if he asked them to. "Furthermore," Thomas said, lowering his voice so only I could hear, "if you cause any problems for David or my family, I will destroy your daughter's career. One phone call to the hospital board, one whisper about her mental instability, one suggestion that she's been using drugs to cope with her father's erratic behavior, and she'll never work as a nurse again. Do you understand me?" Behind him, David finally released Emma's throat. She slumped against the post, gasping, tears streaming down her face, Her neck was already showing red marks where his fingers had been. "Emma's fine," David announced to the crowd, straightening his shirt. "Just a little accident. These things happen when people don't pay attention." The conversation slowly resumed. The jazz quartet started playing again. Servers appeared with club soda to help David with his shirt. The party went on like nothing had happened, like my daughter hadn't just been assaulted in front of 50 people who did nothing to stop it. That's when something inside me went cold and quiet, and perfectly crystalline clear. I stopped seeing David Harrington as my daughter's boyfriend. I stopped seeing Thomas Harrington as an eccentric rich man with outdated ideas. I started seeing them as predators. Predators who had been hunting my daughter for months, grooming her, conditioning her, breaking her down piece by piece until she was too scared and isolated to fight back. Predators who thought they were untouchable because they had money and connections and 40 witnesses who would lie for them. Predators who had just made the mistake of threatening the wrong father because they forgot something about retired detectives. They forgot that we don't just stop knowing how to hunt when we turn in our badges. They forgot that we spent decades learning how to take down criminals who thought they were smarter than us, richer than us, better protected than us. They forgot that every cop owes favors to other cops, that every detective has a network of contacts in federal agencies, state police, district attorneys' offices, judges' chambers, and newsrooms. They forgot that loyalty in law enforcement runs deeper than money or politics or social standing. They thought they were dealing with a broken-down old man who missed his dead wife. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who trained half the investigators in this city. I didn't freeze when David put his hands on Emma's throat. I analysed, I catalogued, I memorised faces, names, reactions, statements. I noted the timeline, the witnesses, the evidence. I watched Thomas Harrington's threat and calculated exactly how many laws he'd just broken in front of 50 people. And then I acted. But not the way they expected. Not with shouting or punching or dramatic confrontations that would make me look like the unstable old man they wanted me to be. I walked over to Emma, who was still standing by the post, trying to compose herself. "Hey, baby," I said quietly, putting my arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" She nodded, but she was shaking. "I'm fine, Dad. Just clumsy. David's right. I should have been more careful." David's right. Jesus Christ, she was already defending him. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you home." "I can't leave," she whispered. "The party isn't over. David needs me here. David needs you, not wants you, needs you, like she was a tool he required for his performance." "Emma," I said, looking directly into her eyes, "I'm your father, and I'm telling you we're leaving, now." For just a second, I saw my real daughter flicker back to life behind her eyes. The Emma who used to argue with me about everything, who never backed down from a fight, who once told a college professor to go to hell when he suggested she wasn't smart enough for pre-med. She nodded. David appeared beside us before we could move. "Emma's not going anywhere," he said, that fake charm sliding back over his voice like a mask. "We have guests to entertain." "Emma's coming home with me," I replied calmly. Actually, Thomas Harrington materialized next to his son. "Emma's home is with David now. Isn't that right, dear?" They were surrounding her. Two predators cornering their prey, making sure she knew she had no escape routes. But Emma looked at me, and for the first time in months, she made her own choice. "I'm going with my dad," she said quietly. David's face went red. "The fuck you are?" "David," Thomas said smoothly, "let them go. Emma's obviously having some kind of emotional episode. Her father can take care of her until she's thinking clearly again." Emotional episode? Like being strangled by your fiancé was some kind of feminine hysteria. I got Emma out of there, drove her to my house in complete silence while she stared out the window and touched her throat where the bruises were already forming. When we got inside, she finally broke down. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, collapsing onto my couch. "I'm so fucking sorry. I've been lying to you for months. I've been lying to myself. I thought it would get better after we got married. I thought he just needed time to feel secure. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, good enough, quiet enough. Perfect enough, good enough, quiet enough. My brilliant, strong, independent daughter had been trying to disappear herself to make some abusive piece of shit comfortable. "Emma," I said, sitting beside her, "this is not your fault. None of this is your fault. But I let it happen," she cried. "I saw the signs. I knew something was wrong, but I was so tired, Dad. After Mum died, after watching you fall apart, I just wanted something stable. I wanted someone who seemed like he had his life together. And David was so charming at first, so attentive, so safe. Safe. The most dangerous men always seem safe at first. He never hit me," she continued. "Not really. Just grabbed me sometimes when he was frustrated, squeezed too hard, pushed me against walls. And his father kept saying that was normal. That was how couples worked through disagreements, that I needed to be more understanding because David was under so much pressure. Not really. Just grabbed me. Just squeezed too hard. Just pushed me against walls." She was minimizing violence that should have sent her running on the first occurrence. "They made me feel crazy, Dad. Like I was overreacting to everything. Like I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding. David would do something that scared me, and then an hour later he'd apologize and bring me flowers and tell me how much he loved me, how he'd never hurt me on purpose, how I brought out the worst in him when I didn't trust him. Classic abuser tactics. Gaslight, isolate, apologize, repeat. Make the victim question their own reality until they're too confused and exhausted to leave." "And I kept thinking about you," she whispered. "How lost you've been since Mum died. How lonely you are. I didn't want to add my problems to your grief. I didn't want to be another burden." Burden. My daughter thought protecting herself from abuse would be a burden to me. That's when I told Emma the truth about what I was going to do. "Baby," I said, "David and his father aren't just cruel, they're criminals. What happened tonight was assault in front of 50 witnesses. Thomas threatening your career was witness intimidation. And I guarantee you this isn't the first time they've done this to someone." I told her about my suspicions regarding David's mother, about the pattern I was seeing, about the resources I had available as a retired detective with 37 years of connections in law enforcement. "I'm going to destroy them," I said simply. "Both of them. I'm going to find every law they've broken, every victim they've hurt, every corner they've cut, and I'm going to bury them so deep they'll never see daylight again." Emma stared at me. "Dad, you can't. They're too powerful. Thomas has judges in his pocket. He has politicians on his payroll. He'll destroy you." "Emma," I said, "your old man put away serial killers and mob bosses and corrupt politicians for 3 decades. Rich assholes who think money makes them untouchable? They're not special. They're just criminals with better lawyers." But I needed her permission, because what I was about to do would get messy, and she'd be in the crossfire. "If you want me to back off, I will," I told her. "If you want to handle this quietly, through counseling or restraining orders or just walking away, I'll support whatever you choose. But if you want them to pay for what they've done to you, really pay, then I need you to trust me." Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "What do you need me to do?" What I needed was information. Everything Emma could remember about David's behavior, his father's comments, their family dynamics. Names of other women David had dated, details about Thomas's business practices, financial information, social connections, anything that might point me toward their vulnerabilities. But first, I needed to activate my network. Monday morning, I made 4 phone calls. Call 1, Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos, Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division. Maria owed me for a case I'd helped her crack 5 years earlier, a money laundering operation that led to 17 convictions. She'd told me to call if I ever needed anything. "Marcus," she said when she picked up, "how are you holding up?" "Not great, Maria. I need a favor." I explained the situation, not the emotional parts. Maria didn't need to hear about my daughter's pain, just the facts. Thomas Harrington, real estate empire, suspicious financial practices, pattern of domestic violence covered up by money and influence. "You think there's federal jurisdiction here?" she asked. "I think there's federal jurisdiction everywhere these people operate," I replied. "Tax evasion, money laundering, interstate commerce violations, civil rights violations under color of law. You tell me which angle you want to pursue." Maria was quiet for a moment. Then, "Send me everything you have. I'll see what I can do." Call 2. Detective Captain Robert Kim, Cybercrime Division, State Police. Bobby was my cousin's kid, and I'd gotten him his first job in law enforcement 15 years ago. He specialized in digital forensics and had access to resources that could make most criminals' secrets disappear. "Uncle Marcus," he said cheerfully. Then his tone shifted. "Wait, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I gave Bobby the same rundown I'd given Maria, plus a request that made him whistle low. "You want me to dig into their digital footprints?" "Marcus, that's a lot of grey area legally." "Bobby," I said, "I'm not asking you to break any laws, but these people have been committing crimes for years, and I guarantee they've been sloppy about covering their digital tracks. Phone records, financial transactions, social media activity, security camera footage, all public information if you know where to look. And if I happen to find evidence of criminal activity during my totally legal investigation, then you'd be obligated to report it to the appropriate authorities," I finished. "Right, obligated. I'll see what I can find." Call 3. The Honourable Judge Catherine Morrison, retired. Catherine owed me her life, literally. I'd taken a bullet meant for her during a courtroom shooting 8 years ago. She'd retired 2 years later, but maintained connections throughout the state judicial system. "Marcus Sullivan," she said warmly, "to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "Catherine, I need to understand how the Harrington family has been getting domestic violence cases sealed or dismissed. Thomas Harrington specifically. What judges they're connected to, what lawyers they use, how they make assault charges disappear." The line went quiet. Then, "Marcus, are you in some kind of trouble?" "My daughter is. The Harringtons have been abusing her, and I think they've done it to other women. I need to know how they've avoided consequences." "Jesus Christ," Catherine breathed. "Marcus, if you're right about this—" "I'm right. I just need help proving it." "I'll make some calls, quietly. There are ways to research sealed cases if you know the right people. Give me 48 hours. Call 4, Sarah Chen, investigative journalist, Metro Tribune. Sarah didn't owe me anything professionally, but I'd saved her daughter from a kidnapping attempt 3 years ago. Personal debts run deeper than professional ones. "Mr. Sullivan," Sarah sounded surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Sarah, how would you like to break the biggest story of your career?" I told Sarah about the Harringtons, about the pattern of abuse, the witness intimidation, the use of money and influence to silence victims, about a family dynasty built on violence toward women, protected by a network of corrupt officials and complicit bystanders. "This is huge," Sarah said, "but I'll need documentation, evidence, multiple sources. The Tribune won't run a story this explosive without ironclad proof." "You'll have everything you need," I promised. "Just be ready to move when I give you the signal." 4 calls, 4 favors. 4 people who owed me enough to risk their careers helping me take down a billionaire and his sociopathic son. Within 24 hours, the information started flowing back. Maria found irregularities in Thomas Harrington's tax filings going back 7 years. Shell companies, offshore accounts, suspicious real estate transactions that looked like textbook money laundering. She couldn't pursue it officially without probable cause, but she could document everything and wait for the right moment to act. Bobby uncovered David's digital history, and it was a goldmine of evidence. Text messages to Emma that constituted criminal threats. Social media posts bragging about keeping his woman in line. Photos from previous relationships showing other women with unexplained injuries. Most damning of all, a private chat group with other wealthy young men where they shared techniques for training wives and joked about domestic violence. Catherine provided the most heartbreaking information. 7 sealed domestic violence cases involving the Harrington family over 15 years. Thomas had one, dismissed after the victim declined to cooperate following a substantial financial settlement. David had 6 different women who'd pressed charges and then mysteriously withdrawn them after meetings with Thomas's lawyers. 6 women. My daughter was number 7. But the sealed records revealed something else. Contact information for previous victims. Women who'd been paid to stay quiet, but who might be willing to speak up if they knew they weren't alone. Sarah began her own investigation, working her sources in the political and business communities. What she found was a network of enablers, politicians who'd accepted Harrington campaign contributions, judges who'd ruled in favor of Harrington companies, police officials who'd minimized domestic violence reports involving the family. The more we dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about 2 abusive men. This was about an entire system that protected them because they had money, influence, and the right last name. But then Thomas Harrington decided to fight back. It started with phone calls, anonymous tips to the police department claiming I was making threats against prominent citizens, reports to the Veterans Affairs Office suggesting I was having mental health problems related to my wife's death, calls to Emma's hospital administration questioning her emotional stability and professional judgment. Then came the legal attacks, harassment charges filed against me by David, claiming I'd threatened him at the engagement party. A restraining order petition requesting that I stay away from both David and Thomas. Complaints to the state police about my misuse of law enforcement resources for personal vendettas. The social media campaign was the most insidious. Carefully edited video clips from the engagement party that made Emma look hysterical and me look violent. Anonymous posts on neighborhood forums warning people about the dangerous former cop who was stalking the Harrington family. Fake news articles planted on fringe websites claiming I was under investigation for corruption and abuse of power. They were trying to destroy my credibility before I could expose theirs. They were trying to make Emma look unstable so no one would believe her testimony. They were using their money and connections to wage psychological warfare against a grieving widower and his traumatized daughter. It almost worked. Emma's supervisor at the hospital called her in for a meeting. Emma, we've received some concerning reports about your behavior lately. Missed shifts, emotional outbursts, conflicts with your family. Are you struggling with something we should know about? The missed shifts were days Emma had stayed home because her injuries were too visible to explain. The emotional outbursts were panic attacks triggered by patients who reminded her of David. The conflicts with family were her finally standing up to her abusers. But the hospital administration didn't know that. All they saw was an employee whose performance was declining and whose family situation was attracting unwanted attention. Emma came home from that meeting in tears. Dad, they're going to fire me. They think I'm unstable. They think you're dangerous. Maybe we should just stop this before it gets worse. That's when I realized Thomas Harrington had made a crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how deep police loyalty runs. Because while he was busy trying to discredit me, my network was working overtime to protect me. Internal Affairs investigated the harassment complaints against me and found them baseless. The restraining order petition was reviewed by Judge Morrison's former colleague, who noted irregularities in the filing and dismissed it pending further investigation. The allegations about misusing law enforcement resources were quietly buried by supervisors who'd worked with me for decades and knew my character. More importantly, word was spreading through the law enforcement community about what the Harringtons were trying to do. And cops don't like rich assholes who think they can intimidate one of their own. Detective Santos escalated her financial investigation to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Detective Kim found federal jurisdiction for his cybercrime evidence when David's threatening messages to Emma crossed state lines. Judge Morrison started making inquiries about the sealed domestic violence cases that had been suspiciously dismissed. And Sarah Chen was building her story methodically, interviewing sources, documenting evidence, preparing to expose the entire corrupt network that protected the Harrington family. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence and financial irregularities. I needed smoking gun proof that would destroy them completely and permanently. So I decided to get it myself. The Harrington estate had security cameras everywhere, but they were old-fashioned visible deterrents rather than sophisticated surveillance systems. Thomas was arrogant enough to believe that his money and reputation were better protection than technology. He was wrong. I spent 3 days observing the property from different angles, noting guard rotations, delivery schedules, staff patterns. The estate was large enough that sections of it were empty for hours at a time. The security was designed to keep out random intruders, not someone with 37 years of experience in surveillance and infiltration. On a Tuesday evening, when Thomas was at a charity gala and David was traveling on business, I entered the estate through a service entrance that was hidden by landscaping. The lock was expensive but not complicated, standard residential security that I'd learned to bypass in my first year as a detective. I had 2 hours before the night security shift arrived. 2 hours to find evidence that would put Thomas and David Harrington away forever. Thomas's study was exactly what I'd expected from a narcissistic sociopath. Photos of himself with politicians and celebrities, awards for his philanthropic contributions, expensive art that he'd probably bought to impress people rather than because he appreciated it, a massive mahogany desk covered with papers, a computer that was never password protected because who would dare invade Thomas Harrington's privacy? I started with the filing cabinets. Thomas was old school enough to keep physical records of important documents, and he was arrogant enough to think no one would ever get access to them. What I found made my blood run cold. Audio recordings, dozens of them, dating back years. Thomas talking to David about handling women. David talking to his father about discipline techniques he'd learned from other men in their social circle. Conversations between Thomas and his lawyers about paying off victims, threatening witnesses, bribing officials, and recordings of phone calls to previous victims. Thomas's voice calm and measured, explaining exactly what would happen to them if they didn't withdraw their charges against David. Threats against their careers, their families, their safety. Descriptions of how easy it would be to destroy their lives if they didn't accept his money and disappear. I found video files on his computer, security camera footage from inside the estate, Thomas watching David abuse previous girlfriends and giving him feedback afterward. More control next time. Make sure she understands who's in charge. If she fights back, increase the pressure. They'd been recording their crimes. They'd been treating domestic violence like a training exercise, with Thomas as the instructor and David as the student. But the most damning evidence was a leather-bound journal that Thomas kept in his desk drawer. Handwritten entries documenting decades of abuse. his own violence toward Margaret, David's progress in learning to control women, plans for Emma's training after the wedding. Emma will require more intensive conditioning than the others, one entry read. She's too independent, too strong-willed. David will need to break her completely before she'll submit properly. We may need to isolate her from her father permanently. Isolate her from her father permanently. They'd been planning to cut Emma off from me completely once they married her. They'd been planning to trap her in a house where they could abuse her without interference. I photographed everything, copied every audio file, every video, every document. I had enough evidence to put both Thomas and David away for decades and to expose every official who'd helped them cover up their crimes. But as I was finishing up, I heard voices in the hallway. The night security shift had arrived early. I had maybe 5 minutes to get out of the house before they found me. 5 minutes to escape with evidence that would destroy the Harrington family forever. I made it out through the same service entrance I'd used to enter, made it to my car and drove home with my hands shaking from adrenaline and rage and anticipation. Because I finally had everything I needed to end this. The next morning, I called a meeting. My house, 10 a.m. Maria Santos from the FBI, Bobby Kim from Cybercrime, Judge Morrison, Sarah Chen from the Tribune, everyone who'd been helping me build the case against the Harringtons. I laid out the evidence I'd gathered from Thomas's study, the audio recordings, the video files, the journal entries, the documentation of bribes and threats and systematic abuse spanning decades. Maria went pale as she listened to the recordings. Jesus Christ, Marcus, this is federal RICO territory, conspiracy, witness intimidation, civil rights violations. We can prosecute them under organized crime statutes. Bobby shook his head as he reviewed the video files. They recorded themselves committing crimes. They recorded themselves planning future crimes. This is the stupidest criminal conspiracy I've ever seen. Judge Morrison's hands were shaking as she read Thomas's journal. This man needs to be in prison for the rest of his life, and every official who helped him needs to be disbarred and prosecuted. Sarah was already planning her exposé. This story is going to destroy them and everyone who enabled them, politicians, judges, police officials, anyone who took Harrington money or looked the other way when women came forward. We had them. We had everything we needed to expose the Harrington family as the criminal organization they really were. But I wanted to do more than just arrest them. I wanted to humiliate them. I wanted to strip away their power and their dignity and their reputation the way they'd stripped away Emma's autonomy and self-worth. I wanted to give them a taste of what helplessness felt like, so I invited them to a meeting. I called Thomas Harrington's office and told his secretary that I wanted to discuss a private matter regarding my daughter's future. I suggested we meet at a restaurant downtown, public neutral territory where they'd feel safe and confident. Thomas agreed immediately. He probably thought I was calling to surrender, to beg him to take Emma back and promise to stay out of their business. He was wrong. The meeting was set for Friday afternoon at Rossi's, an upscale Italian restaurant that catered to politicians and business executives. The kind of place where Thomas Harrington would feel comfortable, surrounded by his natural environment of power and privilege. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the center of the dining room, visible from every angle, impossible to ignore. Then I waited. Thomas and David walked in exactly on time, both wearing expensive suits, both radiating the confidence of men who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. They spotted me immediately and approached my table with the swagger of predators who thought they were meeting with prey. "Detective Sullivan," Thomas said, extending his hand like we were old friends. "So glad you could make it. David and I are very interested in what you have to say." I didn't shake his hand. I gestured for them to sit down. "Gentlemen," I said once they were seated, I want to thank you for coming because there are some people I'd like you to meet. That's when Maria Santos walked in, followed by Bobby Kim, followed by 2 federal prosecutors, 3 IRS agents, a state police captain, and 2 detectives from the Domestic Violence Unit. That's when Sarah Chen walked in with her photographer and her recording equipment. That's when Judge Morrison walked in with warrants for their arrest. The colour drained from Thomas Harrington's face as he realised what was happening. David started to stand up, but Detective Santos was already behind him with handcuffs. "Thomas Harrington," she said in a voice that carried across the entire restaurant, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, witness intimidation, money laundering, tax evasion, and violation of civil rights under colour of law." "David Harrington," Bobby Kim announced as he cuffed David's wrists. "You're under arrest for domestic violence, criminal threatening, assault, and conspiracy to commit violence against women." Every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Every phone came out to record video. Every politician and business executive who'd ever taken Harrington money suddenly found somewhere else to look. Sarah Chen was asking questions, taking photos, documenting the arrests for her front-page exposé that would run the next morning. The federal agents were seizing Thomas's phone and briefcase as evidence. The state police were reading both men their rights in voices loud enough for everyone to hear the charges. And I sat at my table and watched 2 predators finally learn what it felt like to be helpless. "You can't do this," Thomas sputtered as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "I have rights. I have connections. I'll have you all fired by morning." "Actually," Judge Morrison said calmly, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise it." David was fighting the handcuffs, struggling against the detective who was restraining him. "This is bullshit. You have no evidence. My father will destroy all of you." "David," I said, standing up from my table, "we have recordings of you threatening my daughter. We have video of you assaulting her. We have documentation of 6 previous victims who are willing to testify against you. We have your father's journal describing his plans to break her completely after your wedding." David's mouth fell open. Thomas went very still. "We have everything," I continued. "Every crime you've committed, every official you've bribed, every victim you've silenced. And tomorrow morning, everyone in this city is going to know exactly what kind of monsters you really are." As the agents escorted them out of the restaurant, Thomas turned back to look at me one more time. "This isn't over, Sullivan," he said quietly. "Even if you convict us, there are others. Other families, other men who understand the natural order. You can't save every woman." "You're right," I replied, "but I saved mine, and that's enough." The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony from Emma and from 6 previous victims who finally felt safe enough to tell their stories. 6 weeks of evidence that exposed decades of systematic abuse enabled by money, power, and corruption. Emma was incredible on the witness stand, strong, clear, unashamed. She described David's escalating violence in clinical detail. She explained how Thomas had orchestrated her isolation and conditioning. She looked directly at both men as she testified, no longer the frightened woman who'd apologized for spilling barbecue sauce. "They wanted to break me," she told the jury. "They wanted to turn me into a possession, something they could control and manipulate and hurt whenever they felt like it. But they forgot that my father raised me to be stronger than that." The other victims were equally powerful witnesses. Women who'd been terrorized into silence, who'd accepted settlements to make the abuse stop, who'd spent years thinking they were the only ones who'd suffered at the hands of David Harrington. But seeing Emma's courage gave them courage. Knowing they weren't alone made them willing to speak up. Understanding that justice was finally possible made them willing to face their abusers in court. The jury convicted Thomas Harrington on all counts: conspiracy, money laundering, tax evasion, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations. He was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. David Harrington was convicted of 6 counts of domestic violence, criminal threatening, assault, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. The investigation that followed exposed 17 public officials who'd taken bribes or favors from the Harrington family. Politicians, judges, police supervisors, all removed from office, many facing criminal charges of their own. Sarah Chen's exposé won a Pulitzer Prize and sparked a nationwide conversation about how wealth and privilege enable domestic violence. Her follow-up investigations led to similar cases being reopened in 12 other states. But the real victory came 6 months after the convictions, when Emma finally started to look like herself again. The light came back to her eyes gradually. The constant anxiety began to fade. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault. She started making her own decisions without asking permission or checking with anyone else first. She went back to school for a master's degree in trauma counseling. She wanted to help other women who'd survived what she'd survived. She wanted to make sure that no one else had to face their abusers alone. And slowly, carefully, she started dating again. This time she chose a firefighter named Tom, who treated her like she was precious instead of property, who encouraged her independence instead of trying to control it, who understood that love meant supporting someone's strength, not exploiting their vulnerabilities. The first time Tom came to dinner at my house, I gave him the speech I'd wished I'd been brave enough to give David Harrington. "If you ever hurt my daughter," I told him quietly while Emma was in the kitchen, "I will destroy your life. I will use every resource available to me as a retired detective to make sure you regret it for the rest of your very short existence. Do we understand each other?" Tom looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, sir. And if I ever hurt Emma, I'll deserve everything you do to me." That's how I knew he was different. That's how I knew my daughter was finally safe. A year after the trial, Emma and Tom got engaged. The proposal was everything David Harrington's had pretended to be: romantic, spontaneous, focused entirely on Emma's happiness instead of his own ego. When Emma called to tell me the news, she was crying happy tears for the first time in years. "Dad," she said, "I never thought I'd want to get married again. I thought David and his father had ruined that for me, but Tom makes me feel strong instead of small. He makes me feel like myself instead of like some performance I have to put on." The wedding was small, just family and close friends. No politicians or business associates, no performance of wealth or status. Just 2 people who loved each other, promising to build a life together based on respect and equality and genuine affection. I walked Emma down the aisle with tears in my eyes, remembering the broken woman who'd shown up at my house with bruises on her throat and terror in her heart. Looking at the confident, radiant bride who'd survived hell and chosen to believe in love again. During the father-daughter dance, Emma whispered in my ear, "Thank you for saving me, Dad. Thank you for not giving up when I couldn't save myself." "Emma," I whispered back, "you saved yourself. I just provided backup." Because that's what fathers do. We provide backup when our children need it most. We stand between them and the monsters who want to hurt them. We use every resource, every connection, every skill we've ever learned to protect the people we love. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and very determined, we win. Thomas Harrington died of a heart attack in federal prison 18 months into his sentence. David Harrington was stabbed by another inmate who didn't appreciate men who hurt women. He survived, but he'll carry the scars for the rest of his life. I don't feel sorry for either of them. They chose to be predators. They chose to hurt vulnerable women. They chose to use their power to silence victims and corrupt officials and perpetuate cycles of abuse that had been destroying lives for generations. They thought money and influence made them untouchable. They thought my grief and Emma's fear made us easy targets. They thought they could terrorize my daughter into submission and intimidate me into silence. They were wrong, because they forgot the most important thing about fathers who've lost everything except their children. We have nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. They forgot that some men don't break when their world falls apart. Some men get harder, colder, more focused. Some men become very, very dangerous to the people who threaten their families. My name is Detective Marcus Sullivan, retired, 61 years old, widowed, protective father. And I want you to remember this story the next time you see a woman who seems smaller than she should be, the next time you hear a man talking about what his girlfriend allows him to do, the next time you notice someone apologizing for things that aren't their fault. Pay attention, speak up, act. Because somewhere out there, there's another Emma being slowly erased by another David, another Thomas teaching another generation of men that violence is acceptable if you have enough money to hide it. And they're counting on good people to do nothing. They're counting on witnesses to stay silent. They're counting on victims to feel too ashamed or afraid or isolated to fight back. Don't let them count on you. If you see something, do something. If you know something, say something. If you can help someone, help them. Because the difference between a victim and a survivor sometimes comes down to one person who cares enough to act. Be that person. And remember that predators fall, powerful families fall. Legacies built on violence and corruption fall. But daughters rise, survivors rise, truth rises. And justice, when it finally comes, is worth every risk you take to achieve it. That's my story. That's my promise. That's my message to every father who's watching his daughter disappear into someone else's darkness. Don't give up. Don't stay quiet. Don't let them win. Fight for her. Fight with everything you have. Because she's worth it. Because she deserves it. Because love is stronger than fear, truth is stronger than money, and justice is stronger than power. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very determined and very, very angry, you win.